fog clung to Port Haven, Maine, like a shroud, muffling the world beyond the harbor. As a lighthouse keeper, Elise Marrow thrived in the isolation, finding solace in the rhythmic pulse of the beacon she tended. The long hours, the relentless crash of waves, and the ever-present mist were her companions, steady and predictable. Her job wasn't glamorous, checking the lens, monitoring the foghorn, logging weather patterns, but it gave her purpose. She was the guardian of ships lost in the gray, guiding them safely to shore on nights when the world seemed to vanish. Elise had moved to Port Haven 3 years ago, fleeing a life in Boston that had grown too heavy. The city's noise, its expectations, and a relationship that had soured had driven her to this remote outpost. She loved the simplicity here, the way the town's 800 residents knew each other's names, the way the sea told stories in its endless churn. But even in this quiet place, the past had a way of creeping back. She'd met Caleb at a local fish fry 2 summers ago. He was a lobsterman, broad-shouldered and sun-weathered, with a laugh that carried over the din of the crowd. His easy charm disarmed her, and for a while their romance felt like a warm hearth in the cold Maine nights. They'd spend evenings at the Rusty Anchor, sharing stories over chowder or walk the rocky shore, her hand tucked in his. But Caleb's warmth hid a need for control. He didn't like her late-night shifts at the Lighthouse. Didn't like how she'd cancel plans when a storm rolled in. "You care more about that damn light than me," he'd said once, half joking, half bitter. The cracks widened over time, arguments over her independence, his insistence on knowing where she was, who she talked to. When she ended it, he didn't shout. He just stared, his eyes cold as the Atlantic. "You'll miss me," he said, and walked away. Elise thought that was the end. She was wrong. It was a damp October evening, the kind where the fog was so thick you could taste salt on your lips. Elise was halfway through her shift, the lighthouse's beam cutting through the murk, when her radio crackled. "Port Haven Light. This is Coast Guard Station. Got a distress call from a fishing vessel about 2 miles out. Female aboard reporting severe dizziness and chest pain. Can you assist with visual confirmation?" Elise's heart quickened. Most distress calls were routine. Drunk boaters, engine failures. But medical emergencies at sea were dicey. She grabbed her binoculars and scanned the horizon, the fog making it nearly impossible to see. "Coast Guard, this is Port Haven Light. Visibility's low, but I'll keep watch. Can you confirm the vessel's name and passenger details?" "Vessel's the Sea Sparrow. Caller's a woman, mid-30s, name's Lila Vaughn. Says she's alone." The name didn't ring any bells, and Elise let out a small breath. Just another call. She relayed her observations, nothing but fog and the faint outline of waves, and promised to signal if she spotted the boat. An hour later, the Coast Guard reported the Sea Sparrow had been located, the woman transported to a hospital. Routine, Elise thought, logging the incident. But something about the call nagged at her, a whisper of unease she couldn't place. The next night, another call came through. Same vessel, same complaint. Dizziness, chest pain, a woman's voice pleading for help. Elise's stomach twisted as she relayed the coordinates to the Coast Guard. 2 calls in 2 nights from the same boat. It wasn't unheard of, but it was odd. When the Coast Guard reported back, they sounded puzzled. "No one was on board when we got there. Boat was anchored, lights on but empty. We're investigating." Elise's unease grew. She double-checked the locks on the lighthouse door, her eyes scanning the fog outside. Port Haven was small, and strangers stood out. Who was Lila Vaughn, and why was her boat empty? The calls continued over the next week, always at night, always from the Sea Sparrow. Each time, the Coast Guard found the vessel deserted. Elise started keeping a separate log, noting the times, the voice's cadence, the way it trembled just so. She mentioned it to her friend Mara, who ran the general store. "Sounds like a prank," Mara said, wiping down the counter. "Kids messing with the radio, maybe." But Elise wasn't convinced. The voice sounded too real, too desperate. And then there was the name. Lila Vaughn. She'd asked around town, but no one knew a Lila. The harbor master confirmed the Sea Sparrow was registered to a local, but the owner hadn't been seen in weeks. "Probably out of town," he'd said with a shrug. On the 8th night, the call came again, but this time the voice said something new. "Elise, please, I need you." Her blood ran cold. She hadn't given her name over the radio. No one on a distress call should know who she was. She gripped the radio, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "This is Port Haven Light. Identify yourself." The line crackled, then went silent. Elise stared at the receiver, her pulse hammering. She called the Coast Guard, but they found the Sea Sparrow empty again, bobbing in the fog like a ghost ship. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat in the lighthouse's control room, the beam's steady sweep her only comfort. Around 2 a.m., she heard a noise, a faint scraping, like footsteps on the gravel outside. She grabbed her flashlight and peered through the window, but the fog swallowed everything beyond a few feet. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Look closer." Elise's hands shook as she dialed Mara. "Can you come to the lighthouse? Something's wrong." Mara arrived within 20 minutes, her pickup truck's headlights cutting through the mist. They searched the perimeter but found nothing. No footprints, no signs of anyone. "You're spooked," Mara said gently. "Maybe take a few days off." But Elise couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her, waiting in the fog. The next day, Elise visited the harbor master's office, determined to dig deeper. She asked to see the Sea Sparrow's registration records. The boat belonged to a man named Daniel Holt, a reclusive fisherman who'd left town a month ago. No mention of a Lila Vaughn, but as Elise scanned the paperwork, a detail caught her eye. Daniel's emergency contact was Caleb Morse, her ex. Her stomach churned. Caleb had never mentioned owning a boat, but he'd worked on fishing vessels before. Could he be behind the calls? She tried to dismiss the thought. He'd been gone from her life for months, and faking distress calls seemed too elaborate, even for him. But the coincidence was too stark to ignore. That evening, she drove to Caleb's old address, a small cabin on the edge of town. The windows were dark, the driveway empty. She knocked, but no one answered. As she turned to leave, she noticed something in the mailbox, a folded piece of paper, no envelope. Her name was written on it in sharp, slanted handwriting. Inside was a single sentence. "You can't guide everyone to safety." Elise's breath caught. She stuffed the note in her pocket and drove back to the lighthouse, her mind racing. Was Caleb taunting her? Using her job, her sense of duty to pull her back into his orbit? She called the sheriff's office, but without concrete evidence, they could only take a report. "Keep us posted if anything else happens," Deputy Harris said, "and maybe stay with a friend for a bit." Elise didn't want to leave the lighthouse. It was her sanctuary. But she agreed to let Mara stay over. That night, as they sat by the fire, Mara noticed Elise's tension. "You think it's him, don't you?" "I don't know," Elise admitted. "But the calls, the note, it's too specific. He knows how much this job means to me." Mara frowned. If it is him, he's playing a dangerous game. Those calls are tying up the Coast Guard. People could get hurt. Elise nodded, her resolve hardening. She wasn't just a lighthouse keeper, she was a protector. If Caleb was behind this, she'd find out. The calls stopped for 3 days, and Elise dared to hope it was over. But on the 4th night, the radio crackled again. This time the voice was different, calmer, almost mocking. "Elise, I'm in trouble. Don't let me drown." She didn't respond. Instead, she called the Coast Guard and gave them the coordinates, then grabbed her coat and drove to the harbor. If Caleb was on that boat, she needed to see it for herself. The fog was thinner tonight, and as she reached the dock, she spotted the Sea Sparrow moored at the far end. A single light glowed on deck. Elise hesitated, her flashlight trembling in her hand. Every instinct screamed to wait for the Coast Guard, but she needed answers. She boarded the boat, her boots thudding softly on the deck. The cabin door was ajar, and inside she found a radio, still on, and a notebook filled with handwritten logs. Her name mentioned repeatedly, alongside times and dates, matching the distress calls. And she heard it, a creak behind her. She spun around, and there was Caleb, his face half lit by the cabin's dim bulb. "You couldn't stay away, could you?" he said, his voice low. Elise's heart pounded, but she held her ground. "Why, Caleb? Why are you doing this?" He stepped closer, his eyes glinting with something unreadable. "You left me, Elise. You think you can just walk away? I know you. I know what keeps you up at night, what makes you feel alive. This," he gestured to the radio, "this is your life. I just wanted to be part of it again." "You're risking lives," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "People could die because of your games." His smile faded. "It's not a game. It's you. You're mine." The words sent a chill through her. She backed toward the door, but he grabbed her wrist. "Don't run," he said, his grip tightening. "You'll only make it worse." Elise twisted free, adrenaline surging. She stumbled onto the deck, her flashlight falling into the water. The fog was closing in again, but she could hear the Coast Guard siren in the distance. Caleb lunged, but she dodged, sprinting to the dock just as their boat pulled in. "Stay where you are," an officer shouted, his flashlight cutting through the mist. Caleb froze, his hands raised, his face a mask of defiance. Caleb was arrested that night, charged with misuse of emergency services and harassment. The notebook on the Sea Sparrow detailed his obsession. Pages of notes about Elise's schedule, her habits, even the lighthouse's maintenance logs. He'd used Daniel Holt's boat, knowing it was rarely checked, to stage the calls. Lila Vaughn, it turned out, was a fiction, a name he'd invented to lure Elise into his trap. Elise took a week off, staying with Mara while the sheriff's office investigated. They found no evidence Caleb had planned to physically harm her, but his actions had shaken her to her core. The lighthouse, once her refuge, now felt exposed, its beam no longer enough to keep the darkness at bay. She started therapy, something she'd resisted for years. The sessions helped, but the fear lingered, a shadow that followed her on foggy nights. She changed her routines, varied her shifts, and installed a security system at the lighthouse. Mara and the other townsfolk rallied around her, their support a lifeline. One evening, as Elise stood at the lighthouse's railing, watching the beam pierce the fog, she thought about Caleb's words. "You're mine." He'd been wrong. She belonged to herself, to the sea, to the light that guided others home. She wasn't his, and she never would be. But the unease remained. Every creak of the lighthouse, every flicker in the fog, reminded her that some shadows don't fade easily. She learned to check her surroundings, to trust her instincts, to never ignore the whispers in the dark. In Port Haven, where the fog hid secrets. Elise knew she'd never be truly alone again. Months later, Elise met Tara, a marine biologist studying the harbor's ecosystem. Tara was quiet, thoughtful, with a smile that warmed the coldest nights. They bonded over their love for the sea, their shared need for solitude balanced by moments of connection. Elise was cautious, but Tara's patience eased her fears. They took things slow, exploring the coast, sharing stories under the stars. One night, as they sat on the lighthouse's steps, Tara noticed Elise's tension. "You're still looking over your shoulder, aren't you?" Elise nodded, her eyes on the horizon. "It's hard not to, after everything." Tara took her hand. "You don't have to carry it alone." For the first time in months, Elise felt the weight lift, just a little. She wasn't fully healed, maybe she never would be, but she was moving forward. The fog still rolled in, thick and heavy, but the lighthouse's beam cut through it, steady and sure. And so did she. The sea never forgets. It carries stories of loss, of survival, of those who cling too tightly to what's gone. Elise learned that trust, once broken, leaves scars that whisper in the quiet moments. To anyone who's felt the chill of obsession, the weight of someone who won't let go, listen to the warnings, check the shadows, trust the voice that tells you something's wrong. In Port Haven, the fog hides many things, but it can't hide the truth forever.